Hey everybody, welcome back to another video. Thank you so much for being here with me. Today we are going to take a look back at Amber Heard's days during her trial against her ex, Johnny Depp. She actually made a lot of mistakes that were exclusively visual, and it's what I would call visual repellent. It just immediately gave people the wrong impression, sent the wrong messages, sent the wrong vibe, and people didn't like it. It most certainly contributed to her loss during the trial, but it was also a huge factor in the media backlash that she received. Because like it or not, we do judge with our eyes first. Many of her outfits and general styling just immediately sent the jurors the wrong impressions or failed to paint her in a sympathetic and vulnerable light. And make no mistake, she needed to be seen as vulnerable, trustworthy, a victim, sympathetic in order to win this trial. Or at least to have been seen as truthful and not gotten the media backlash and rejection that she has received. The way she dressed herself and styled herself was wrong in so many ways, and today's video is going to break down the top 5 visual mistakes that she made during the trial. Mistake number 1 was copying Johnny's outfits. Now, whether or not this was intentional or not is really irrelevant. No matter what, you would never want to be accused or able to be accused of copying your alleged abusers' outfits in a trial like this, in a situation like this. That is the last thing you would want. If you were in Amber's position, you should be making conscious efforts to look opposite or different or avoid anything. Say you had some similar items in your wardrobe and you saw him wearing that, you would want to avoid it like the plague going forward in the trial, because it makes no sense to wear something that your ex or your alleged abuser wore. It very much threw her into the crazy category for a lot of people simply because it was so bizarre and creepy, and again, it was illogical. If you truly are a victim, you would be repelled by things that remind you of the abuser who made you suffer. If you were truly scared of this person or felt threatened by this person or overpowered by this person, you would never want to wear something that they had worn or look similar to them in any way. You would naturally be drawn away from that. However, I'm not entirely convinced that this was happening all of the time. I think that this was a lot of the internet kind of maybe getting a little bit carried away at times, because on this occasion, Johnny wore this pinstripe suit on the 13th and Amber wore this black suit on the 14th. I'm not seeing enough similarities here that I would call it copying, simply because it's a suit with a big lapel or a pointy lapel. Like, it's just not the same enough to me. However, the bumblebee pin is suspicious. It is undeniable that she consciously chose this to wear 2 days after Johnny wore it. Like I said, if you really were scared, like she alleged, the last thing you would do is choose to wear this pin, let alone be photographed in it. Same goes for this situation. He wore a gray suit on the first day of the trial, and she wore this big manly gray jacket the very next day. This makes zero sense, and this does seem like a similarity. However, here's one that I'm not fully convinced was copying. On April 18th, Johnny wore his hair in a ponytail for the first time during the trial, and on April 19th, Amber Heard wore her hair in a ponytail for the first day of the trial. The ponytails are not similar enough in my opinion. But again, you should be consciously avoiding any similarities. So say she wanted to wear her hair in a ponytail, she should wait a few days before doing it so that she's not accused of copying or any similarities could possibly be drawn. Part of that is also the fact that it was a publicly televised trial, so you want to be extra careful of the imagery in a situation like this from a PR perspective, but also from a legal perspective. You would want to be extra conscious and extra careful of these types of things during a trial like this. It's so high profile, so you know the internet is going to be after it, it's going to be obsessed with it, the news is all going to be running with headlines about it, it's sensational. So you would want to advise your client in this sort of situation, or as the client in this sort of situation, you would want to be so super careful to sidestep any possible connections or lines being drawn at all. Part of why the copying allegations had an impact on this situation, the trial, the jurors, and the public at large is because so many people have dealt with these sorts of unhealthy dynamics that involved mirroring. Narcissistic, toxic types, just not very pleasant people to deal with in general will often mirror you, especially early on, It's done for a lot of reasons, but it's almost always a generally manipulative thing that sent red flags for a lot of people, reminding them if they were familiar of that sort of dynamic or they had experienced abuse or just toxic relationships in general, it would definitely sort of trigger that memory to them, and immediately she would be labeled as such in those people's minds just by proxy. Mistake number 2 is the harsh styles of clothes. She wore really masculine lines a lot of the time during this trial. She wore frumpy and chunky looks, things that made her look bigger, things that were big in general. In photographs, she appeared a lot bigger than she does in real life or in other types of outfits. She has a very narrow frame and bone structure. Although she may have gained some weight before this trial, these big, chunky, and frumpy silhouettes really did her no favors. As far as coming across as a victim, some of that is visual, like it or not. So during a trial like this, even though that was years later, she still was trying to win as the victim of this sort of relationship or bad situation, whatever you want to call it. And so these strong and often ill-fitting looks just made her look harsh. What we would traditionally call a power look or a power suit, strong tailoring that commands a sense of control, strong-willed impression, was unfortunately suiting the narrative that Johnny's side was saying that she is more aggressive and rather controlling. So she accidentally played into his side of the story through her outfits. Wearing things that allowed her to look a little smaller would have given the more vulnerable impression. The more delicate or small she would have looked, the harder it would have been to believe or to visualize her as an aggressor. Mistake number 3 was a lack of color from her wardrobe. Now, in a situation like this, it is somber, stressful, negative, and serious. It's also an environment where you would want to be dressed professionally. But that doesn't mean only blacks, whites, and grays, which is what her wardrobe literally consisted of, 100% white, black, and gray. I couldn't find hardly any pictures of her from the trial where she was wearing a color. Soft colors, pastels, muted tones, earthy tones would have been a lot better of a choice for her, especially just gravitating towards lighter colors. Even plenty of whites and creams would have been fine, but she was just reinforcing these harsh silhouettes, left things looking really hard, while some softer colors would have just like even navy or plum would have added a softness that inspired more sympathy towards her. In this setting, trying to look big, powerful, and controlling is the wrong move. Like it or not, we do judge with our eyes first. We cannot help it. It's a biological trait to help keep us safe, and it's also something that we develop from babyhood by associating facial features and expressions with emotions and character traits. So we are hardwired to do this. As we mature, most of us no longer hold the belief that looks are the most important thing or that they're fair to judge people on wholly. However, we still automatically gather a first impression of anyone that we meet based on visual cues. It's often the first sense engaged when meeting someone. You see them before you hear their voice or shake their hand or take in their scent. All of these things leave impressions, but the visual is the first, and that's why presentation matters. There's a reason why when you are applying for a job, the guidance is to make a good, strong first impression. Dress professionally, dress for the job that you want. I mean, we're the same with food. We judge it on whether it looks good or not, so it's not that different. We judge areas, we judge everything with our eyes. That is why it is so important in situations like this to be very conscious of how you're presenting yourself visually. Mistake number 4 is that she didn't really look herself. She aged herself through things like her hairstyles, her makeup choices, as well as the clothing in general. Johnny looked very familiar. Not just because he was much more famous and recognizable than her, but wearing suits not far from what we've seen on him in the past. Though clearly it was not the same as his off-duty aesthetic, he chose looks that were still distinctly familiar for him, but still appropriately professional for the occasion. He didn't look like some other person walking into court. He looked very much himself. He wore things that were the same types of fit, the same types of accessories that he normally wears. However, Amber was dressed in a completely foreign manner, We saw her in nothing that was very familiar. Even her hairstyles were quite odd and out of character for her. The overall styling gave the impression of what someone might think somebody should be wearing in a situation like this, rather than focusing on dressing appropriately for the occasion itself, the professional and simple approach, but also in a style that feels familiar and conveys the sort of image that matches your message. In the past, she tended to wear more feminine things or a feminine spin on masculine outfits, but not these sort of stuffy looks before. She didn't match her messaging at all, and she didn't match the Amber that people were used to seeing. I think that simple slacks and blouses or button-downs that were less fussy and stuffy would have been a much better approach than these types of things that she wore. They were just so bulky and oftentimes looked like they didn't fit her very well. Paired up with those weird stuffy hairstyles that were highly distracting and this strange makeup compared to what we were used to seeing, blew it all out of the water. Another thing to keep in mind though is that in this situation, when we saw her in court, like on the TV, but also in pictures, it wasn't those perfectly crafted, great angles that you can get when you're on the red carpet or when you're getting professional photos taken, modeling, or in a movie. They're certain to get the most attractive and appealing angles of you, and we just didn't have that when you're just being recorded in a courtroom. So that's one difference to keep in mind, that these people were not getting like their best angles, so they're of course going to look a little bit different than we're used to seeing them in their professional capacity, like in a movie, for example. But still, she just took things too far from her typical looks. Mistake number 5 is her hair and makeup altogether. And we can dive deeper into specific outfits, particularly hair and makeup problems, in an upcoming video. If you guys like today's video, just leave it in the comments. Be sure to click the like button, subscribe if you haven't already. That way I know you guys would like another video with analysis on Amber Heard's appearance mistakes during her trial. But back to the hair and makeup mistake. This was a major mistake. These hairstyles were stuffy, overdone, and overstyled, as well as reminiscent of old Hollywood glam at times rather than simple professional styles. As an alleged victim, simple, clean hairstyles would have made sense. Simple low ponytails, single French braids, simple chignons, basic low buns, and less voluminous hairstyles would have shown that she was not so worried about her appearance, but rather justice. Those of us who have been through difficult times, difficult relationships, toxic people know you really don't care what your hair and makeup look like. You really don't care about your clothes or your outfits. A simple low ponytail or just a straight plain down hairstyle would do and make sense for the narrative that she was pushing. Not to mention those hairstyles were highly distracting because they were just odd. They were not hairstyles you would typically see. They weren't very attractive hairstyles in general. They were weird hairstyles, weird choices, so they were very distracting on top of everything else. As for her makeup, she overdid it once again, sending a more narcissistic vibe by bringing her cheekbones out really harshly with intense contouring. It was distracting. Her cheekbones were especially distracting during this trial. Her makeup wasn't very well balanced a lot of the time, and although I understand she's probably had a little bit of work done and she wasn't going for full glam, which is appropriate, she didn't choose full soft makeup or no makeup. I honestly think she would have done a lot better if she would have kept it to just a tiny bit of powder and a tiny bit of mascara and looked more like she had no makeup on than what she did here, where she clearly had plenty of foundation and contouring and blush and brows for days. It just didn't send the right message and it didn't flatter her. Be sure to let me know if you liked today's video. Thank you so much for being here. Leave in the comments what you think and what you thought about her looks during the trial. I will be sure to make another video about this, detailing some of her more specific looks a little bit more closely, if you guys want. Thank you so much for being here with me. I hope that you have a happy day ahead, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!